My son, Pastor Daniel, looked right at me from the pulpit and said, "Sometimes, God asks us to give up the one thing we treasure most on this earth to prove our faith." I felt a swell of pride, my vision blurring with tears. I was sitting where I always sat, right in the front pew on the left side, the wood worn smooth from 50 years of my Sunday coat. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass window of the Good Shepherd, casting a warm, colorful glow over everything. It was a perfect morning, and my son, my Daniel, was preaching the most powerful sermon I had ever heard him give. I thought he was talking about my devotion, my lifetime of service to this little church in our corner of Georgia. Turns out, he was talking about my house. Every Sunday, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. To see my boy up there, so strong and confident, his voice filling the sanctuary, it was the answer to a lifetime of prayers. When he was just a child, he'd line up his stuffed animals and preach to them from a little wooden crate in the backyard. Now, here he was, a real pastor, a leader in our community. I watched the faces of the congregation, my friends and neighbors, and I saw how they looked at him. They saw what I saw, a man of God. A good man. You know how it is when you're in church, and the pastor says something that feels like it was meant just for you? It can be a powerful, moving feeling. If you've ever felt that, I hope you'll stay and listen to my story. It helps to share these things, to know you're not the only one who has been through something like this. Because sometimes, that powerful feeling isn't what it seems. That morning, Daniel's sermon was about Abraham and Isaac, about the faith it takes to be willing to lay your most precious treasure upon the altar. "What is your Isaac?" he asked, his eyes seeming to scan every face, but always coming back to rest on mine. "Is it your pride? Is it your comfort? Is it the brick and mortar you call a home when your true home is in heaven?" Each word struck a chord deep inside me. I felt a profound sense of conviction. He was right. We hold on too tightly to the things of this world. My little house, the one my late husband, Charles, and I had worked so hard for, was just a temporary vessel. My real treasure was my faith, and my son, who was spreading God's word so beautifully. The tears that rolled down my cheeks were tears of pure, simple pride and spiritual awakening. I made a silent promise to God right then and there. "Whatever you ask of me, Lord, I will give it." Oh dear, if only I had known who was really doing the asking. After the final hymn, as the organ played softly, the church emptied out into the bright Georgia sunshine. I stayed in my seat for a moment, just soaking in the peace of the sanctuary. I felt so full of love, for God, for my son, for our whole community. I was adjusting my hat, getting ready to leave, when Daniel and his wife, Victoria, approached me. Daniel's face was still shining with the fervor of his sermon. Victoria was beside him, her hand tucked into his arm, wearing a bright, polished smile that never quite seemed to reach her eyes. She always looked perfect, not a blonde hair out of place. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice low and full of emotion. He took both of my hands in his. They were warm and strong. "That message today, I feel like God was speaking through me, for a very special purpose, a purpose that involves you." "Oh, Daniel," I said, my heart fluttering. "It was a beautiful sermon, truly." "It was more than a sermon," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a burning intensity. "It was a call to action. God has laid a heavy but glorious burden upon my heart, and I believe you are the key to fulfilling it." Victoria squeezed his arm, her smile widening. "It's a sacred mission, Mama Betty," she cooed, "and we need to talk to you about it. Soon." The way she said it, so sweet and yet with an undertone I couldn't quite place, sent a tiny, inexplicable shiver down my spine. But I pushed the feeling away. This was my son, my pastor. I was just being a silly old woman. I was just being a silly old woman. I told myself that all the way home, and again as I prepared my Sunday dinner. It was our tradition. Every Sunday after service, Daniel and Victoria would come to my house for a meal. My life was made up of these small, precious traditions. The quiet rhythm of my days was a comfort to me. My home, the one Charles and I had poured our life savings into, was my sanctuary. It always smelled a little like lemon polish and cinnamon, and the floors creaked in a way that sounded like old friends whispering. In the mornings, I'd tend to my garden, my knees complaining a bit but my heart happy. In the afternoons, I'd volunteer at the church, organizing the bake sales or polishing the pews. My life was simple, it was predictable, and it was deeply, deeply good. That sacred mission started to weave its way into my peaceful routine that very Sunday afternoon. As I served the pot roast and mashed potatoes, Daniel began to talk about his grand vision for our church. He wasn't just a pastor, he was a visionary, he said. He spoke of growth, of outreach, of becoming a beacon for the entire county. "The congregation is growing so fast, Mom," he said, his eyes shining. "It's a blessing, a real blessing, but our facilities, they're holding us back. We had to turn away 3 children from the Sunday school class this morning. Not enough room." "Oh dear," I said, my heart aching for those children. "That's a shame." "It's more than a shame, Mama Betty," Victoria chimed in, placing her fork down delicately. "It's a missed opportunity to save a soul." She looked around my spacious dining room. "Your house is just so wonderfully central to town, isn't it? Everyone knows this street. It's such a landmark." I just smiled, thinking she was paying the old house a compliment. Well, Charles and I were very lucky to find it. But the comments didn't stop. Every Sunday, the conversation was the same. It was about the church's growing pains, the need for a youth center, a food pantry, a counseling office. The list grew longer each week, and with each new need, their eyes would sweep over my home, my garden, my property. Daniel would say things like, "If only we had a foundation to build upon, a cornerstone gifted to us by the Lord himself to begin this work." And he would look at me, a hopeful, pious smile on his face. I have to admit, a part of me was swept up in his passion. This was my son doing the Lord's work with such fervor. His dreams felt like my dreams. I started to imagine it myself. My home filled with the laughter of children learning about the Bible, my kitchen used to feed the hungry. The thought filled me with a sense of purpose. It felt righteous. My sweet-natured traditionalist soul, the one that taught me to give freely and trust my pastor, saw only the beautiful possibility. It saw my son's vision, and it wanted to help him build it. I didn't see the eager, almost hungry look in Victoria's eyes when she talked about the property values in my neighborhood. I didn't question why their vision for a community center always seemed to involve my specific piece of land and no other. My son was a man of God. The way I saw it, his motives had to be pure. That was my blind spot, you see. A faith so simple and a love for my son so deep that it blinded me to the very human sins of greed and manipulation. The gentle pressure of their weekly suggestions wasn't a warning sign to me. It felt like God himself was knocking on my door, asking me to give more. And I was ready to answer. I just didn't realize that the knock would soon become a demand. I was ready to answer. I just didn't realize that the knock would soon become a demand. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The phone rang and it was Daniel. His voice was different, lower, more serious than usual. "Mom," he said, "can I come over? There's something important we need to discuss, just the two of us." Just the two of us. Victoria wasn't coming. That was unusual. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down. "Of course, dear," I said. "I'll put on a pot of coffee." When he arrived, he wasn't the smiling, easygoing son who came for Sunday dinner. He was Pastor Daniel, a man on a mission. He carried his large, leather-bound study Bible, the one with his name embossed in gold on the cover. He accepted a cup of coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, he asked if we could sit in the living room. He sat on the edge of the sofa, across from my favorite armchair, and placed his Bible on the coffee table between us. "Mom," he began, his eyes full of a heavy, pious sincerity. "I have been wrestling with the Lord in prayer for weeks. I've been asking him for guidance, for a sign on how to lead our church into the future he has planned for us." I just nodded, my hands clutching my warm coffee cup. I didn't know what to say. "He has given me a vision," Daniel continued, his voice dropping to an odd whisper. Clear as day, he showed me this community, hungry for the word. He showed me children who need a safe place, families who need counseling, hungry people who need a meal. And then he showed me the vessel for all of that good work. Mom, he showed me this house. The air in the room seemed to grow thick and still. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer against an anvil. He was no longer suggesting. He was declaring. He told me that this house, this property, is to be the cornerstone of our new ministry, he said, his gaze unwavering. He is calling you, through me, to make the ultimate sacrifice of faith, to donate this house to the church, to turn your worldly home into God's home. I couldn't speak. My mind was a whirlwind. It was everything I had secretly begun to imagine, but to hear it said aloud, so plainly, so finally, it was overwhelming. A part of me, the devout, trusting mother, swelled with a terrifying sense of honor. Me, the Lord had chosen me for such a task. But another part of me, a small, cold part I didn't recognize, felt a sense of deep, primal wrongness. Daniel, I finally managed to whisper, my voice sounding weak. That's a very big thing, your father. Charles and I, we built our whole life here. His expression didn't change, but a shadow of something, disappointment, impatience, passed through his eyes. He reached forward and placed his hand on his Bible. I know, he said softly, his voice full of gentle pity. And God knows, too. That's what makes the calling so profound. He isn't asking for something that is easy to give. He is testing your faith, Mom, just like he tested Abraham. He is asking if your love for the memory of this house is greater than your love for him and his work. It was a masterstroke. In one sentence, he had turned my love for my late husband and my home into a spiritual weakness. My hesitation wasn't caution, it was a sin. My sentimentality wasn't a comfort, it was an idol I was placing before God. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. How could I, a lifelong Christian, value my own comfort over the needs of the church, over a direct calling relayed by my own son, a pastor? He saw the conflict on my face and pressed his advantage. Pray on it, Mom, but don't pray for an answer you want to hear. Pray for the strength to do what you know is right. He stood up, kissed my forehead, and left the untouched cup of coffee on the table. He walked out, leaving me alone in the sudden, crushing silence. I was surrounded by the life Charles and I had built, and I had just been asked to tear it down. To question my son felt like questioning God himself. But to say yes felt like a betrayal of the man I had loved for 50 years. My heart was torn in two. Confused and lost, my mind drifted back to the beginning, to the days when this house was just a dream, and to the man who had laid its every brick with love. My mind drifted back to the beginning, to the days when this house was just a dream, and to the man who had laid its every brick with love. My Charles. He wasn't a pastor or a man of big, important words, but his hands were blessed. He worked at the lumber mill his whole life, coming home each night smelling of sawdust and sweat. He was a quiet, steady man, and his goodness was as reliable as the sunrise. This house wasn't just a building to us, it was a promise we made to each other. I remembered the years we spent in that tiny, two-room apartment over the hardware store, saving every spare dollar. Charles worked double shifts, his hands rough and calloused. I took in sewing and mending late into the night, the hum of my machine a constant prayer for our future. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had a dream sketched out on a napkin that we kept pinned to the wall. It was a drawing of this house. The day we finally had enough for the down payment, Charles held my hands and I saw tears in his eyes. "We did it, Betty girl," he'd whispered. "We've got our foundation." And he meant it in every sense of the word. This house was the foundation for everything that came after. It was the floorboards where our Daniel took his first wobbly steps. It was the kitchen where I taught him how to bake my grandmother's apple pie. It's the doorframe in the pantry that still has all the pencil marks, showing his height as he shot up from a little boy into a lanky teenager. Every corner holds a memory. I can still see Charles sitting in that armchair by the fire, reading the Bible aloud, his voice a low, comforting rumble. I remember Daniel's friends, a whole troop of noisy, hungry boys, running through the sprinkler in the backyard on hot Georgia summer days. And I remember the day Daniel came to us, right here in this living room, his face so serious and so young, and told us he felt a calling from God to join the ministry. The pride I felt in that moment. It was immeasurable. Charles and I looked at each other, and we knew that all our hard work, all our sacrifices had been worth it. We had raised a good man, a man of God. And that was the memory that hurt the most right now. The boy I raised was kind and compassionate. He was the one who would bring home stray animals and share his lunch with the kid who had none. How could that boy grow into the man who sat before me last night, using the word of God as a tool to take away his mother's home? It didn't make sense. My heart couldn't connect the two people. The Daniel I knew, the one who lived in my memory, would never, ever cause me this kind of pain. And so my mind tried to protect me. It told me I must be the one who was wrong. I must be misunderstanding. The way I see it, my love for him was a fortress, and it refused to let the truth get in. I told myself that Daniel was just overcome with his passio. N for the church, that he didn't realize how deeply his words had cut me. He was a visionary, and visionaries, well, they don't always see the little things. It had to be that. It just had to be. But as I tried to soothe my own aching heart with these excuses, another, colder memory surfaced, uninvited. It was from a few weeks ago at Sunday dinner. And it wasn't about Daniel. It was about his wife, Victoria. And it wasn't about Daniel. It was about his wife, Victoria. The memory was sharp and clear. It was from a Sunday dinner about a month ago. Daniel had been in the middle of one of his passionate speeches about expanding the church's outreach, about his vision for a place that could truly serve the community. I was beaming, my heart full, just listening to him. Then Victoria, who had been mostly quiet, suddenly clapped her hands together, her eyes sparkling with an excitement that seemed, even then, a little out of place. "Oh, yes," she'd exclaimed. "And Betty, the kitchen in the new ministry house, I was just looking at a magazine, and they had the most beautiful designs. We could put in one of those big 6-burner gas stoves, you know, the professional kind, and a huge marble island right in the middle. It would be absolutely perfect for the church ladies to prepare meals for the hungry." I remember I blinked, a bit taken aback. "A marble island," I'd said with a little laugh. "Oh dear, that sounds awfully fancy for a food pantry, doesn't it?" Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. "Well, you know," she'd said, recovering quickly, "we want to do things right, for the glory of God, of course." Daniel had just nodded, caught up in his own vision. "Everything for his glory, Mom." At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself it was just Victoria being Victoria. She was a young woman who liked nice things, who always had the latest purse and perfectly manicured nails. It was natural for her to think in terms of marble islands and fancy appliances. You know how it is, her enthusiasm just got the better of her. I saw it as a minor, harmless detail, a bit of youthful materialism that had nothing to do with Daniel's holy mission. It was a clue, a bright, flashing warning sign, and I had looked right at it and explained it away because I wanted to. But now, sitting alone in the heavy silence of my living room, that memory felt different. It felt sinister. The words Marble Island echoed in my mind. That wasn't the language of charity. That was the language of interior design. It was the language of a woman planning her dream kitchen. Her dream kitchen, in my house. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my heart. Was it possible? Was Daniel's vision not about a community center at all? Was this about them? Moving in, taking over. The thought was so ugly, so monstrous, that I felt a wave of guilt for even thinking it. This was my son, my Daniel, and his sweet wife. How could I let my mind conjure such a terrible accusation? The way I see it, my heart was at war with my gut. My heart, the one that had loved Daniel unconditionally for 45 years, was telling me to trust him, to have faith. But my gut, that deep, quiet instinct that had warned me when a pot was about to boil over or when a storm was coming, was screaming that something was terribly wrong. I stood up and started pacing, my hands twisting in the fabric of my apron. I tried to force the memory of Victoria's sparkling eyes and her talk of marble countertops out of my head. It was uncharitable. It was unkind. I was taking a silly, throwaway comment and turning it into a conspiracy. Daniel was a man of God. He wouldn't lie to me. He wouldn't use his position, use God himself to trick his own mother. He couldn't. I stopped in front of the fireplace, my eyes falling on the main family portrait on the mantel. It was from a few years ago before Charles passed. We were all there, smiling. Daniel had his arm around me, looking so proud. I looked at the face of the son I loved, and I made a choice. I chose to believe in him. I chose to believe that my suspicions were a product of my own grief and fear. I decided, right then and there, to put the thought of Victoria and her kitchen out of my mind. I would focus on what Daniel had asked of me. I would pray for the strength to have faith in my son. I would pray for the strength to have faith in my son. And I tried. Oh, how I tried. I went to the midweek prayer service and prayed until my knees ached, asking God to quiet my doubtful heart and fill me with a spirit of generosity. I told myself that the cold knot of dread in my stomach was just my own selfish nature fighting against a righteous calling. I tried to see my house not as my home, but as a future sanctuary for lost souls. But the Sundays became almost unbearable. My front pew seat, once my greatest comfort, now felt like a spotlight. Daniel's sermons were no longer a source of peace. They felt like arsonal accusations. He'd preach about the rich young ruler who could not part with his possessions, and he would look directly at me. He'd detail the story of the widow's mite, praising the woman who gave all she had, and his eyes would find mine, filled with a heavy, meaningful weight. The entire congregation would nod along, murmuring, "Amen." And I would just sit there, my gloved hands clenched in my lap, feeling the heat of 100 gazes on my back. The pressure didn't end when the sermon did. It followed me out into the narthex, into the sunshine of the churchyard. People who had been my friends for decades would come up to me, their faces full of a strange mixture of pity and admiration. "Betty, honey," Martha Gable said, squeezing my arm a little too tightly. "Daniel told us about the magnificent gift you're considering for the church. You have always had the most generous heart." She said it as if it were already a done deal. What could I say? If I denied it, I would look like I was backing out of a holy promise. If I agreed, I would be sealing my own fate. So I just smiled, a weak, watery smile that felt like a grimace. "Daniel has a big heart for the Lord's work," I'd murmur, and let them interpret that however they wished. Even Deacon Henderson, a man my Charles had respected, took me aside. "Your husband would be so proud, Betty," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Leaving a legacy like this for the community, it's a wonderful testament." They were using my love for Charles against me, and they didn't even know it. The way I see it, Daniel and Victoria had planted a story, and now the entire community was watering it for them, helping it grow into a thorny vine that was wrapping itself around me, tighter and tighter each day. My sanctuary had become a courtroom, and I was on trial for the sin of selfishness. My home, once a place of refuge, now felt like a burden I was being shamed into laying down. I started to dread the phone ringing. I found excuses to miss the ladies' Bible study. The simple, joyful life I had known was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. The conflict was tearing me apart. My head told me to trust my son, my pastor, my church. But my heart, the heart that had ached with love as I watched my husband sand the very floorboards beneath my feet, was screaming in silent protest. One night I couldn't take it anymore. The house was so quiet and my thoughts were so loud. I knelt by my bed, the old floral comforter cool beneath my hands, and I didn't pray a polite, rehearsed prayer. I just wept. The tears I had been holding back for weeks finally came, hot and bitter. "Please, Lord," I whispered into the darkness, my voice cracking. "I am so lost, I am so confused, I don't know what to do. Is this you asking, or is this them? Am I a faithful servant, or am I just a foolish old woman? Please just send me a sign. Send me some clarity. Send me a friend. I stayed there for a long time, my forehead pressed against the bed, feeling smaller and more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I stayed there for a long time, my forehead pressed against the bed, feeling smaller and more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The next day passed in a fog of anxiety. I didn't answer the phone. I just sat in my armchair, the house silent around me, my heart a tangle of confusion and guilt. The sign I had prayed for did not come, or so I thought. Late that afternoon, the doorbell rang. My first instinct was to hide. I thought it might be Daniel, coming to ask for my final answer. But then I peeked through the curtains and saw Barbara's sensible sedan parked in my driveway. Barbara, my friend of 40 years. The woman who had held my hand at Charles's funeral. The woman who had served on the church deacon board with my husband for 2 decades. She was the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I had made. I opened the door and she stood there holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "Thought you might not feel like cooking," she said, her kind, steady eyes searching my face. She didn't have to say anything else. She knew me. She saw the turmoil I was in. She bustled into the kitchen, placing the casserole on the counter, and then she led me to the kitchen table. She sat down opposite me, her hands folded. She was not one for idle gossip, so when she spoke, you listened. "Betty," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "We need to talk. I'm worried about you. This business with the house, it doesn't feel right to me." A wave of relief washed over me. Finally, someone else saw it. Someone else felt it. "Oh, Barbara," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm so confused. Daniel says it's a calling from God, and the whole church is acting like it's a done deal. Am I being selfish for hesitating?" Barbara reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was warm and strong. "You are the least selfish person I know, Betty Miller," she said. "And you have every right to hesitate. In fact, I thigh. NK, your hesitation is the Lord's wisdom at work in you." She took a deep breath. "I have to tell you something, and there's no easy way to say it. I saw Daniel and Victoria yesterday, at the Oakwood Diner." I felt a little flutter of hope. Maybe she saw them being pastoral, helping someone. "Oh, they do love their lunch specials there." "They weren't alone," Barbara said, her eyes holding mine. "They were with a man named Bill Peterson." The name didn't mean anything to me at first. "He's a real estate developer, Betty," she continued, her voice low. "The one from Atlanta who has been buying up all that land out by the interstate for that new shopping center. He's as ruthless as they come." The warm, familiar comfort of my kitchen suddenly felt cold. The smell of the casserole on the counter seemed to fade. "A developer?" I repeated, my voice a whisper. Why would Daniel be meeting with a developer?" "That's what I asked myself," Barbara said grimly. "I was in the booth behind them. They didn't see me. Betty, they weren't talking about a youth center. They weren't talking about a food pantry. I heard words like commercial zoning, lot value, and after demolition." He was congratulating Daniel on securing such a prime piece of real estate. Demolition. The word hit me like a stone. They weren't going to use my house. They were going to destroy it. They were going to tear down the walls that Charles and I had built, tear up the garden where I still felt his presence, and sell the bare earth to the highest bidder. The sheer scale of the deception was dizzying. Still, my heart, that foolish, stubborn mother's heart, tried to find another explanation. "But maybe he was just giving them advice," I stammered, knowing how weak it sounded. "Maybe he was just helping them understand the finances of it all." Barbara looked at me with a deep, sorrowful pity. It was the look of a friend who knows a terrible truth that you are not yet ready to accept. "I wish that were true, honey," she said softly. "I truly do, but that's not all I heard. There's more, and I think you need to hear it." "I wish that were true, honey," she said softly. "I truly do, but that's not all I heard. There's more, and I think you need to hear it." My heart, which was already aching, clenched in my chest. I braced myself. Barbara reached into her large, sensible purse and pulled out her smartphone. She fumbled with it for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You know I'm no good with these newfangled things," she murmured. "But my grandson showed me how to use the voice recorder. After what I saw at the diner, I had a terrible feeling." So at the finance committee meeting on Tuesday, after we approved the budget for the new choir robes, I just let it run in my purse. I felt ashamed doing it. Now I'm just ashamed I didn't do it sooner. She found what she was looking for and placed the phone on the table between us. "It's mostly just rustling papers," she warned. "But wait for the end. After the meeting was over." She pressed play. I heard the scraping of chairs, muffled coughs, people saying their goodbyes. Then, after about a minute of near silence, I heard two voices become clear. They were alone in the meeting room. Daniel and Victoria. The first voice was Victoria's, sharp and impatient. "So, do you think she'll actually do it soon? Bill Peterson is getting antsy about the land survey." And then I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. My son laughed. It wasn't his warm, public laugh. It was a short, cynical bark. "Oh, she'll do it," he said. "Don't you worry. I laid the guilt on so thick last night she could barely look me in the eye. Another week of my sermons on Abraham's sacrifice, and she'll be begging me to let her sign the papers." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The voice on the phone was my son S., but the words were those of a monster. "And then we can finally get out of that drafty old parish house," Victoria said, her voice giddy. "I mean, it's embarrassing. The pastor's wife driving a 10-year-old car. I want that white Mercedes we saw, Daniel. I deserve it." There was another pause on the recording, and then the final, soul-destroying words from my son. "Patience, my love. It's all part of the Lord's plan." He said it in a mocking, sing-song voice. "The Lord's plan is that Mom gets a nice, small, manageable apartment close to the bus stop, and we get a new Mercedes and a clear conscience. See, everybody wins." Barbara's hand reached out and pressed stop. The sudden silence was more deafening than the voices had been. I stared at the phone on my floral tablecloth. The man on that recording, the man who had laughed about my guilt, the man who had used the Lord's name to justify buying a luxury car with the ashes of my home, that was my son. My Daniel, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The man whose ordination had been the proudest day of my life. The sweet, simple faith I had lived by my entire life shattered into a million pieces. The pain was a physical thing. It was a white-hot poker in my chest, and it took my breath away. All the excuses, all the rationalizations, all the desperate attempts of a mother's heart to believe in the goodness of her child were burned away in the fire of that one cruel laugh. He wasn't just taking my house. He was taking everything. My memories, my love, my faith in the very goodness of the world. He was taking it all, and he was laughing while he did it. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt Barbara's hand on my shoulder, gently pushing a napkin toward me. I wept. I wept for my dead husband, who would be so heartbroken. I wept for my son, the good boy I had lost somewhere along the way. And I wept for myself, for the foolish, trusting old woman I had been. After a long time, the tears stopped. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a forest after a fire, when everything has been burned down to the cold, hard earth. There was nothing left to lose. I wiped my eyes and looked at my friend. My expression must have changed, because Barbara's look of pity was replaced by one of surprise. "Barbara," I said, and my voice was not the voice of a weeping old woman. It was quiet, it was steady, and it was cold. "Can you send me a copy of that recording?" "Can you send me a copy of that recording?" The question hung in the air of my quiet kitchen. Barbara looked at me, her worried expression slowly melting away, replaced by a look of profound, steely respect. She had known me for 40 years as Betty Miller, the sweet-natured baker of pies and organizer of church socials. She was now meeting someone else entirely. "Of course I can," she said, her voice firm. She spent the next 10 minutes showing me how to transfer the audio file from her phone to mine. Her hands were steady, and so were mine. When the file was successfully saved, she gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "What are you going to do, Betty?" I looked at the small, dark screen of my phone, the evidence of my son's betrayal now a permanent part of it. "I'm going to accept the truth, Barbara," I said softly. "And then I'm going to make sure everyone else hears it too." After she left, I didn't pace the floors. I didn't weep. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table. I listened to the recording one more time, not with the ears of a heartbroken mother, but with the detached focus of a juror. I listened to the casual cruelty, the mocking laughter, the sheer, unadulterated greed. I accepted it. I absorbed the ugly truth until it became a part of me, a cold, hard stone in the place where my naive trust used to be. The way I see it, you cannot fight an enemy you are not willing to see clearly. And I was finally seeing my son clearly. The next day, I put on my good Sunday dress, even though it was only a Friday, and I drove to the church. I found Daniel in his office, reviewing his notes for the upcoming sermon. He looked up, surprised to see me. He immediately arranged his face into a mask of gentle, pastoral concern. "Mom," he said, standing up, "I'm so glad you're here. I've been praying for you." "I know you have, Daniel," I said, my voice calm and even. I had practiced it in the car, scrubbing it clean of any tremble or accusation. "And I have been praying, too, all night. The Lord has been heavy on my heart." A gleam of triumph flashed in his eyes, but he quickly concealed it. "And what did the Lord tell you, Mom?" he asked, his voice dripping with false piety. I let out a soft, weary sigh, a perfect imitation of a woman who has wrestled with her conscience and lost. "He told me that you are right," I said. "He told me that my attachment to this house is a worldly one, and that a gift of this magnitude, well, it shouldn't be a quiet affair. It should be a testimony to inspire others." Daniel could barely contain his smile. "A testimony," he repeated, savoring the word. Yes, it should." "So that's what I'd like to do," I continued, looking him straight in the eye. "I have made my decision, but I want to announce it myself, to the whole congregation, this Sunday, during the service, from the pulpit after your sermon." If he had any suspicions, they were washed away by his own arrogance. He saw my request not as a strategy, but as the final, dramatic act of a pious old woman. He probably thought I wanted the attention, the applause of the congregation for my grand sacrifice. He and Victoria walked me to the door, their arms around me, praising my courage and my faith. "The whole church will be moved, Mama Betty," Victoria gushed, her smile finally reaching her eyes now that she could smell the money. "You're an inspiration to us all." "I just want to do what's right," I said, looking at the son I no longer knew. They thought they were witnessing a surrender. They had no idea they were helping me set a trap. They were busy planning a celebration for their victory. They didn't realize they were actually arranging their own public execution. They had no idea they were actually arranging their own public execution. The church on Sunday morning was more crowded than I had seen it since Easter. Word had clearly gotten around that Betty Miller was going to make a special announcement. As I walked to my usual pew, I felt the eyes of the congregation on me. They were kind eyes, mostly, filled with a gentle, misinformed pity. They saw a dear old woman about to give up her last worldly comfort for her faith. They smiled at me, whispered, "God bless you," and I smiled back, the truth a cold, hard secret in my heart. From the stage, Daniel and Victoria were radiant. They had positioned 2 extra chairs up there, beside the main pastor's seat. One was for me. I saw it and understood. This was to be a coronation of their success, and I was the guest of honor. Daniel's sermon was his masterpiece. He was a gifted speaker, I had to give him that. He wove a tapestry of scripture and emotion, all centered on the theme of legacy. He talked about what we leave behind, not in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the hearts of the community and in the works we do for the Lord. He spoke of Abraham, of the widow and her mite, and with every story, his eyes would find mine, his expression a mixture of pride and loving pressure. He was using our shared faith as his primary weapon, and he was wielding it with deadly skill. The congregation was mesmerized. I could hear sniffles and quiet amens all around me. They were hanging on his every word, and so was I, but for a very different reason. When he finished, the church was wrapped in a reverent silence. Daniel let the moment hang in the air, then he raised his hands. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "today we are blessed to witness a truly historic moment of faith in the life of this church, a testament to a lifetime of devotion." He turned and smiled at me, a brilliant, loving smile that was utterly false. "I want to invite a woman we all know and cherish, my own dear mother, Betty Miller, to come up and share the wonderful testimony of what the Lord has laid on her heart." A soft, supportive applause filled the sanctuary as I stood up. I clutched my simple black purse to my chest. Inside it, my phone was fully charged. I walked the familiar path down the center aisle, my steps slow and steady. I could feel the collective gaze of my friends and neighbors, their hearts full of warmth for me. When I reached the stage, Daniel took my hand to help me up the last step, whispering, "You're doing the right thing, Mom. God will bless you for this." I looked at his hand holding mine, and I felt nothing. I walked to the ornate wooden pulpit. Daniel and Victoria stood just behind me like a royal honor guard. I looked out at all the familiar faces, my friends, my community, the people my son had lied to. "Good morning," I said, my voice quiet but clear through the microphone. It didn't tremble. "Thank you, Pastor, for your beautiful words." I turned to look at Daniel. "Your sermons have moved me more than you know, and you are right. The Lord has been working on my heart, and I have made a decision about my house." A happy sigh rippled through the congregation. Daniel beamed. "But before I share my own words," I continued, turning back to the crowd, "I was so moved by my son's passion that I wanted to share a moment of his own private devotion with you all. A moment that truly shows his heart for his ministry, and one that helped me make my final decision." I opened my purse and took out my phone and a small audio cable. The young man who ran the sound system, a sweet boy named Kevin, hurried over, thinking he was helping a confused old woman with technology. "Let me help you with that, Mrs. Miller," he whispered. "Thank you, Kevin dear," I said, as he plugged the cable into the church's sound system. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a slightly confused but still smiling glance. I held the phone in my hands and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "I want you all to hear the conviction our pastor has," I said, my voice ringing with a new and unfamiliar authority. "Even when he thinks no one else is listening." I looked directly at my son. His smile was gone. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty, of fear, appeared in his eyes. I looked down at the screen of my phone. My finger hovered over the play button. The entire sanctuary held its breath. My finger hovered over the play button. The entire sanctuary held its breath. I looked at my son, at his handsome, confident face, and for a fleeting second, I saw the little boy who used to bring me bouquets of dandelions. My heart ached. Then I looked at Victoria beside him, her eyes glittering with greed, and the moment of weakness passed. I pressed play. A faint crackle, the sound of my friend Barbara's purse R. Ustling, and then a voice. My son's voice, stripped of all its pastoral holiness, filled the sanctuary. It was small and tinny, but the church's powerful sound system amplified every cruel syllable. I laid the guilt on so thick last night, she could barely look me in the eye. A collective gasp went through the pews. I saw Deacon Henderson's jaw drop. Martha Gable brought a hand to her mouth. "She'll be begging me to let her sign the papers." Then came Victoria's giddy, sharp voice, talking about a new Mercedes. And finally, the last nail in the coffin, Daniel's mocking, sing-song words that had shattered my world. The Lord's plan is that Mom gets a nice, small, manageable apartment close to the bus stop, and we get a new Mercedes and a clear conscience. See, everybody wins. The recording ended with his short, cynical laugh. That laugh echoed off the stained glass windows, a sound of pure sacrilege in that holy space. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, ringing silence, thick with shock and a dawning, collective horror. No one moved. No one breathed. I looked out at the faces of my friends and neighbors. Their expressions were no longer pitying or admiring. They were stunned, their mouths agape. They slowly turned as one, their gaze shifting from me to the man standing frozen behind me on the stage. Daniel was the color of ash. His confident, pastoral smile was gone, replaced by a rictus of pure panic. Victoria looked like she was about to faint. They were exposed, naked in their greed, in front of the very people they had worked so hard to impress. I leaned back toward the microphone. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. That, I said, my voice steady, was the divine inspiration that helped me make my final choice. I turned my head slightly to look at my son. My home was built with my husband's hard work and my own loving care. It is a monument to a good man's life. It will not be demolished for a luxury car. A low murmur of angry agreement started to build in the pews. I held up a hand, and it subsided. I will be keeping my home, I said. However, my commitment to this church and to the real work of the Lord in this community has not changed. I looked to the second row, where Barbara was watching me, her eyes filled with tears of pride. Therefore, I will be establishing a new trust in my late husband's name. A significant portion of my estate will be placed into it, with the sole purpose of funding the food pantry, the youth outreach programs, and a new scholarship for underprivileged children in this town. That trust will be managed by a new, independent committee of church members, to be chaired by a woman of unimpeachable faith and integrity, Mrs. Barbara Henderson. Barbara gasped, but then her expression hardened with resolve, and she nodded slowly. As for my son, I said, and my voice finally cracked, just for a moment with the weight of it all. I will be praying for his soul. And with that, I was done. I turned from the pulpit, walked past my son and his wife who stood like statues of shame, and descended the stage steps. I did not run. I did not hurry. I walked with my head held high down the center aisle. The congregation, my friends, parted for me, their faces a mixture of sorrow for my pain and profound respect. I didn't look back. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the church and stepped out into the bright, clean sunlight. I had lost a son, but I had saved my home, my integrity, and perhaps the soul of the church he had tried to poison. I had found my true legacy. For the longest time, I thought my faith was a quiet, simple thing. I thought it meant believing what I was told, especially when the words came from a man in a pulpit, and most especially when that man was my own son. But I've learned that true faith isn't quiet. It's a fire inside you. It's the courage to stand up for what's right, even if it means standing against the people you love. My heart still aches for the son I lost, the good boy I remember. But I don't cry for him anymore. The way I see it, the most loving thing I could do for him was to stop enabling his lies. The truth can be a bitter medicine, but it is the only thing that can ever truly heal. My story had a painful ending, but it was a real one. And maybe you have a story, too, about a time you had to choose between an easy lie and a hard truth. If you do, I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing it in the comments below. It helps so much to know we're not alone on these difficult roads. If these stories give you a little bit of hope, I pray you'll follow along for more. The most important lesson I can offer is this: listen to that small, quiet voice inside your heart. Your intuition. It is a gift. Don't let anyone, no matter their title or their relation to you, shout it down. They may have a house of God, but you have a soul. And that is a sanctuary no one can ever take from you.